The man's answer was soft, almost reverent, a signal to reseal what you broke. The device emitted a low hum, the same hum that had followed her since the day she entered the house. It vibrated through the cliffs, through the ground, through her bones. The villa's lights flickered, the earth trembled. She looked back toward the sea, wind tearing through her hair. "You'll bury it again." "That's what we do," he said. "We bury truth, we survive it." Clara's voice broke through the storm. "Not this time." She turned and ran, not toward the house, not toward the road, but toward the edge. The man shouted her name. The beam of light wavered. Clara leapt. For one suspended moment, the world went silent, the sea below a mirror, the storm a still photograph, her body suspended between the life she'd fled and the truth she refused to surrender. Then she vanished into the dark. The waves swallowed her, and the light from the jeep blinked out as the device in the man's hand pulsed once more, sending a final, echoing hum through the cliffs. Far below, deep beneath the villa, behind tons of rock and steel, the vault door flickered with faint light again, gold lines crawling across its surface, reforming the seal. And through the rising wind, for just a moment, a whisper not of warning, but of recognition. The sea keeps its debts. As the storm consumed the coast, the truth sank once more beneath the waves, but this time it carried a name carved into its heart, Clara Mayers. When Clara woke, the world was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that follows survival. The air smelled of salt and rust. She was lying on the beach beneath the cliffs, soaked to the bone, the tide lapping at her boots. Her fingers clutched the remains of the satchel, torn but not lost. Above her, the villa stood silhouetted against a bruised sky, dark and silent once more. The sea had calmed, as if pretending nothing had happened. She pushed herself upright, every muscle aching, her breath shallow. The horizon was gray, the light of dawn struggling to break through. For a moment, she just sat there shivering, staring at the house she had inherited for $1, and wondering how much of her soul it had already cost. Her name still echoed in her mind, the signatures, the ledger, Eveline Mariner, hers, the ink older than her lifetime. Somehow, it had always been waiting for her. The satchel's contents were nearly ruined. Pages clung together like damp leaves. The manila folder marked Scepter. Final account was half shredded, but fragments of text still survived, phrases that made no sense alone, but felt heavy with meaning. Asset relocation, strategic collapse, custodial inheritance. She read them again and again, her hands trembling. Custodial inheritance, the words Eveline's lawyer had used in that letter, long before Clara knew what it meant. The wind carried the faint sound of a motor somewhere above. She looked up. The cliff road was empty, but the marks of the jeep's tires cut deep into the mud, leading away from the estate. Whoever had chased her last night was gone. Gone, or watching from somewhere she couldn't see. She climbed slowly, following the narrow path that led back to the villa. The storm had ripped apart what little was left of the roof. Debris littered the courtyard, broken glass, snapped branches, shards of marble. Every step echoed in the stillness. When she reached the front doors, they were already open. The wind stirred the torn curtains inside, and faintly, beneath the scent of rain, she smelled smoke. Not the smoke of fire. Paper. She ran inside. The study was in ruins, the desk overturned, pages scorched and scattered across the floor. Someone had been here after her, or while she slept. The typewriter that once sat on the desk was gone. The mirror shattered, the old photograph of Eveline missing, and yet, in the middle of the destruction, one thing remained untouched: the ledger, the original, thick leather, bound ledger she had found weeks ago. It sat upright against the wall, as though waiting for her return. She approached it cautiously. The cover was warped by moisture, but the serpent emblem was still visible, glinting faintly in the dim light. She opened it. The first page was blank. Then, slowly, impossibly, words began to appear, ink bleeding through from nowhere, curling across the paper in elegant, deliberate handwriting. Every fortune demands its keeper. Her heart froze. The words stopped moving. The ink shimmered faintly, then settled. Clara shut the book, her breath shaking. Her reflection in the broken glass looked pale, hollow, like someone she no longer recognized. The floor creaked behind her. She turned sharply, flashlight raised, but there was no one there, only shadows. The house was breathing again. She forced herself to sit, her body trembling. Logic told her she should leave, take what remained of the evidence, find the police, the press, someone. But logic didn't fit here anymore. The truth she'd uncovered wasn't built for daylight. She glanced back at the ledger. Its weight seemed to pull at her, heavy not just in mass but in meaning. She whispered to herself, "This is what they died for. This is what they killed for." The house answered with silence. Outside, the sound of gulls echoed faintly over the cliffs. The sky was brightening now, wash out blue bleeding through clouds. But inside the villa, light never quite reached the corners. She walked through the grand hall, the chandelier swaying gently above, its remaining crystals catching the dawn like tears. Every inch of the place told a story she no longer needed anyone else to confirm. Gold had been stored here, lies had been traded here, blood had been spilled here, and somewhere between all of that, she, Clara Mayers, had become the last name in the book. In the dining room she stopped. The long table was bare now, stripped of the ghostly feast she'd once seen. Dust settled over the surface like snow. Something on the far end caught her eye, a small envelope, resting where the wine glass used to be. Her name was written on it. She approached slowly, every instinct screaming to turn back. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the flap. Inside was a single note, written in the same elegant script she'd seen in the ledger. "You cannot unmake inheritance, only decide what to do with it. No signature, no seal, but she didn't need one. Eveline." The ink shimmered faintly before fading as if it had been written just moments ago. Clara stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in her hands. She thought about everything that had led her here, the dollar deed, the storm, the vault, the voices, the man who had drowned for redemption, the men who had killed for silence, the fortune that had cost lives and peace alike. She thought about her son, his face, his future, and she understood what the note meant. The money wasn't gone. The villa's real worth wasn't the ledgers or the documents, it was the power of what they contained. The truth, the leverage. If she exposed it, the world would burn. If she hid it again, she would become what they all were, another keeper of the lie. The storm outside returned in faint growls, echoing over the sea. Clara folded the note carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and looked toward the cellar door. The air was colder there, waiting, watching. She whispered, "If the sea guards the truth, maybe it's time the truth learned to breathe." Then, for the first time since she entered the house, she turned the other way, not downward, but upward, toward the stairs. The second floor creaked under her weight, each step moaning like a memory. She walked toward the master bedroom, the one that had belonged to Eveline. The portrait was gone, but the wall behind it was cracked, faint lines, spidering outward like veins. She touched the surface, and a small piece of plaster broke free, revealing something hidden beneath. A metal panel, the serpent emblem again. Her pulse quickened. She pried the edges loose with a broken piece of wood. Inside was a compartment, small, square, empty, but for a single key wrapped in red silk. The same ornate design as the first, but cleaner, newer, and beside it, engraved into the steel, "The second vault is not below." She stared at the message, the key gleaming in her palm. Her breath trembled. Then where, as if in answer, a distant noise, faint but unmistakable, came from outside. The sound of a car engine, the black jeep, back again. Clara turned toward the window, the key still cold in her hand. The world outside was bathed in pale sunlight now, but the shadow of the jeep stretched long across the driveway. Someone stepped out, not the collector, a woman, tall, composed, wearing a dark coat and gloves, and in her hand a letter. Even from a distance, Clara could see the seal, the same serpent. As the morning light spread across the ruin, Clara realized the inheritance wasn't finished, it was only beginning to choose its next keeper. The woman's figure stood motionless in the courtyard, her presence calm against the chaos of the ruined villa. Wind tugged at her dark coat, the letter clutched in her gloved hand. She didn't knock. She didn't call out. She simply waited like someone visiting a grave. Clara watched from the cracked bedroom window, breath held. The new key in her palm felt heavier by the second. The woman looked too composed, too certain, like she already knew what Clara would do. The villa creaked around her, whispering through its fractured beams. The air held that familiar tension again, the kind that comes before revelation or collapse. Clara backed away from the window, heart pounding. The letter, the seal, it meant one thing: whoever this woman was, she belonged to them. But how? The organization, the inheritors, the unseen hand that had turned her into a pawn. Her mind reeled. She could run, try the cliffs, disappear before the stranger reached the door. But a truth she couldn't deny twisted inside her. Running would mean hiding the secret again, and Eveline's last words still echoed in her head. You cannot unmake inheritance, only decide what to do with it. The woman began walking toward the front doors, heels echoing against the stone like a metronome for Clara's panic. Each step drew closer. Clara hurried out of the bedroom, down the main staircase, nearly tripping over broken glass and fallen plaster. Her breath came short, ragged. The doors groaned open before she reached them. The woman stood framed in daylight, composed, her expression unreadable. She was older, early 50s, maybe her hair dark with streaks of silver, her face sharp with the calm of someone who'd seen too much and stopped flinching. Mrs. Mayers, she said, voice smooth, polite, professional. You've been very difficult to find. Clara froze. Who are you? The woman stepped inside, closing the doors behind her. My name doesn't matter. I represent an institution that handles unfinished legacies. You've inherited one that requires immediate resolution. Clara's stomach turned. Institution? You mean the Mariner estate? The woman's eyes flicked briefly to the broken chandelier above them, the cracked floors, the dust. You've seen what they left. That's more than most. She extended the envelope. The serpent seal glimmered faintly in the morning light. This is for you. Clara didn't take it. What's inside? Instructions, the woman said simply. A ledger like this house doesn't keep itself. You've opened something that was meant to stay closed. Now it's your responsibility to maintain it or erase it. Clara laughed bitterly, the sound trembling. Erase it? Do you even know what's down there? The woman's gaze didn't waver. I know exactly what's down there. For the first time, emotion flickered across her face, regret, maybe fear, quickly buried. The world wasn't ready for it in 1947. She continued, It isn't ready now. We protect it. You will too. I'm not part of this, Clara said. I didn't choose. Choice ended the moment you signed the deed. The woman interrupted softly. The system recognized your name before you ever saw this place. It was arranged long ago. Eveline knew who would come next. Clara felt her knees weaken. That's impossible. Eveline's been dead for decades. Time doesn't matter to history. The woman said, Custodianship passes through blood, but not the way you think." The sentence lingered, cryptic and heavy. Clara shook her head, stepping back. "No, I won't keep your secret. People deserve to know what they buried here, the gold, the corruption, the names. The world deserves the truth." The woman sighed, as though she'd heard it before. "Truth," she said softly. "Mrs. Mayers, people don't want truth. They want comfort. Every truth costs a civilization more than it can afford." Her tone was calm, almost sorrowful. Eveline thought she could release it. She continued. "She learned the same thing you're learning now. Fortune is never free. It carries the weight of everyone it buried." Clara's hand tightened around the key in her pocket. "You're saying if I expose this, they'll come for me?" The woman smiled faintly. "They already have." Lightning cracked far off over the sea, no storm this time, just the echo of one that had already passed. The villa seemed to listen. "Open the letter," the woman said quietly. Clara hesitated. Then, slowly, she broke the seal. Inside was a single page, typed impersonal. "To current custodian Mariner Estate per clause 47 of Project Scepter Custodial Charter. The holder of the ledger and surviving documentation assumes full fiduciary and historical responsibility for containment, preservation, and non-disclosure of all physical and digital assets. Non-compliance will result in standard dissolution protocols." Clara's hands trembled as she read the last line. "Dissolution," she whispered. The woman met her eyes. "It means what you think it means." Silence filled the hall, long, suffocating. Then the woman stepped closer. "Walk away, Mrs. Mayers. Seal the house again. Burn what remains. Forget the ledger." Clara stared at her, the note crumpled in her fist. "And if I don't, then you'll understand why they call it the weight of fortune." The words lingered like the aftertaste of smoke. The woman turned toward the door, adjusting her coat. "We all thought we could carry it once," she said quietly, "until we realized it was carrying us." She stepped into the light, but before leaving, she paused. "One more thing, the vault you opened, it wasn't the last. Don't look for the second one. Don't use that key." Then she was gone. The sound of her footsteps faded into the crunch of gravel outside, the engine of the black Jeep roaring to life once more. Clara stood motionless in the doorway long after it had disappeared beyond the cliffs. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The house around her seemed to hum again, faintly, that deep, buried vibration she could never escape. She looked down at the letter, the seal, the words, "Custodial responsibility. Non-compliance will result in dissolution." She whispered to herself, voice shaking, "They think I'm going to bury it again." The wind howled through the broken window panes, scattering papers across the floor like restless ghosts. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the key wrapped in red silk, the one from Eveline's chamber. It glimmered in the faint light, cold and beautiful. Her reflection caught in a shard of glass on the floor, pale, hollow, haunted, and for the first time, she didn't look like the woman who had bought a house for $1. She looked like a keeper, but her voice was steady when she whispered, "Not this time." She picked up the ledger from the table, her hands firm now, her breath even. Whatever fortune or curse, the house carried whatever empire of silence it served. She knew her choice had already been made. She wasn't here to inherit the lie. She was here to end it. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sea again, not from a storm, but from something shifting deep beneath the cliffs, like the house itself reacting to her defiance. Clara turned toward the staircase, the ledger under her arm, the red key glinting between her fingers. Upstairs, the wind whispered through the cracked walls, carrying a voice she almost recognized, Eveline's. "Every secret costs its keeper, child. Decide what you're willing to pay." Clara's eyes burned, but her voice was steady. "Everything." As she climbed toward the light, the villa groaned around her, no longer an enemy, but a witness to the woman who had finally chosen truth over inheritance. By nightfall, the villa had fallen silent again, but it was a silence Clara no longer trusted. The walls no longer whispered, they listened. The air hung heavy with a kind of waiting stillness, as if the house was holding its breath for something that had already begun. She sat at the dining table beneath the fractured chandelier, a single candle flickering in the dark. The letter from the woman lay open beside her, the words non-compliance will result in dissolution burned into her mind. The ledger sat on the table like an accusation. The red key gleamed faintly in the candlelight. She should have left. Every rational part of her mind told her so. Yet something deeper, something stubborn, ancestral, inevitable kept her there. Outside, the wind had shifted, the sea was too calm, the cliffs too quiet, and then she saw it through the cracked window pane. Headlights, not one set, 3. They moved in silence up the winding cliff road, engines muted, beams cutting through fog like blades. Her breath caught. They were coming. She blew out the candle. The room plunged into darkness. Her heart pounded as she grabbed the ledger, the red key, and the photograph of Eveline she'd found earlier that day. Something about that face, those eyes, made her feel less alone. She stuffed everything into her satchel and moved quietly through the hall. A sudden light flickered across the far wall, headlights sweeping through the broken window. She crouched low, pressing herself against the cold marble floor. The first vehicle stopped at the front gate. Doors opened. Boots crunched gravel. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She crawled toward the parlor, ducking beneath the fallen drapery. The villa's silence wasn't empty, now it was watching. The shadows shifted with the movement of the intruders outside. A voice carried through the night, distorted by distance but clear enough to chill her blood. Move quiet, no alarms, we need the ledger intact. There was no hesitation. No fear, these men knew what they were walking into. The front door creaked, metal met wood. A lock gave way with a soft metallic snap. They were inside. Clara's breath hitched as she backed deeper into the room. The moonlight slanted through the windows, catching dust motes that drifted like ghosts. Footsteps 3, maybe 4 entered the hall. She could hear them splitting up, their voices low, methodical. Search the study, check the cellar, upstairs first. If she's alive, she won't leave it behind. Their precision terrified her more than rage would have. These weren't burglars, they were retrieval. She slipped into the side corridor, moving by instinct more than sight. Every floorboard felt like it screamed beneath her weight. She reached the base of the staircase. The candlelight from upstairs flickered faintly, not hers. Someone was already there. Her heart hammered as she ducked into the small closet beneath the stairs. The air was damp, filled with the scent of mildew and dust. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching the satchel to her chest. The sound of boots drew closer, slow, deliberate. A beam of light cut through the crack beneath the door. She held her breath. The footsteps stopped right outside. For a moment, there was nothing, only the electric hum of her heartbeat in her ears. Then, the faint scrape of metal against wood. The door handle moved. She bit her lip to stop herself from making a sound. The latch clicked halfway down, then stopped. A second voice called from the hall. Nothing yet. Check the east corridor. The handle released. The footsteps moved away. Clara waited 5 full breaths before exhaling. Her hands shook. Sweat slicked her palms despite the cold. She couldn't stay hidden forever. The men were searching room by room. They would find her or the ledger soon enough. She pressed her ear against the door, listening. Faint whispers, the creak of the floorboards above. A door slammed shut upstairs. Then a muffled thud, followed by a shout. One of them had found something. Clara seized the moment. She slipped out of the closet and moved quickly down the back corridor. Her boots slid on the wet tile, but she caught herself on the wall. She knew the villas lay out better than they did now, every hallway, every false door, every creaking step. If she could make it to the servant tunnels, she might escape through the old coastal passage. But when she reached the kitchen, the back door was already open. The night air rushed in cold, wet, and wrong. Someone was already there. A silhouette filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, motionless. The faint glow of a flashlight haloed his head, but his face was a void. Clara froze. He stepped forward slowly, the light rising to meet her. Her fingers tightened on the satchel. For a brief second, his voice broke the tension, low, steady, familiar. "Clara," she blinked. It was the man from the tunnels, the one she thought dead. He looked worn, wounded, but alive. Mud streaked his face. His eyes burned with something fierce and unyielding. "You're alive," she whispered. He nodded once. "They're not here for me. They're here for what you're holding." Behind him, the headlights of the other vehicles glowed faintly through the fog. Shadows moved in the distance. She stepped closer. "Who are they?" "The ones who clean up what should never surface," he said. "The second generation of Scepter's guardians. They'll burn the house if they have to." Her heart pounded. "Then we can't let them." He looked at her, really looked, and something like reluctant respect flickered across his face. "You want to fight them?" "No," she said quietly. "I want to end it." The words hung between them like a spark. He nodded once, grimly. "Then we start with the vault." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the ruined villa for a single, cinematic moment. Two survivors standing in the wreck of an empire built on silence. And outside, the intruders closed in. The man turned toward the cellar door. "They think it's empty," he said. "Let them." "What's down there?" He glanced back at her. "A truth they're not ready to kill yet." Clara followed him into the dark, her grip tightening on the satchel, her pulse racing with both fear and resolve. Behind them, a voice called out from the hall, the same voice that had spoken the night she first saw the black jeep. "Find her. If she runs, take the ledger." The footsteps quickened. The search began again. But this time, Clara wasn't the frightened woman who had stumbled into a cursed house. She knew the corridors, the secrets, the sound of the sea beneath the floor. She knew how the house moved, how it breathed, and as she descended into the darkness once more, a strange calm settled over her. If they wanted the truth buried, they had come to the wrong place, because now the house was on her side. As thunder rolled across the cliffs, Clara disappeared into the tunnels below, and the villa, for the first time in decades, began to fight back. The tunnels swallowed them whole, the air damp and electric, carrying the storm's distant pulse like the heartbeat of something ancient. Clara's flashlight flickered across the walls, catching glimpses of carvings she hadn't seen before, words in Latin, faint symbols of crowns and serpents, messages meant for the keepers who came before her. The man led her forward with steady urgency, his steps sure even in the darkness. Above them, the villa groaned and thundered with movement, heavy boots pounding across the floors, doors breaking, voices shouting commands that echoed like ghosts through stone. "They'll sweep every level," he whispered, "but they don't know the house connects this deep. Not even their blueprints go this far." Clara's breath came fast. "You said we had to start with the vault. It's sealed again." He nodded. "That's why we're not going to open it. We're going to bury it properly this time." Her flashlight trembled. "How?" "By collapsing the tunnels. The generator's lines run beneath the west wing. If we overload the circuit, the blast will take everything, the vault, the records, the access channels. No one will ever find it again." His voice carried the weight of someone who had tried and failed before. But Clara hesitated. "If you destroy it, the truth dies with it." He turned, eyes hard. "You think the truth lives in paper and steel? No, Clara, the truth lives in you, in what you saw, what you decide to carry." She swallowed hard. "If I carry it, they'll kill me. They'll kill you either way." The silence between them was thick, broken only by the drip of condensation from the ceiling. Then a metallic sound echoed from behind them. The man froze. Clara turned her light toward the source, faint glints of movement in the dark. Shadows, multiple. They've found the access stair. He hissed, "Move." They ran, the beam of light slicing through the tunnel as gunmetal echoes filled the air, sharp commands. Boots striking stone, the thud of pursuit closing in. Clara's lungs burned. The tunnels twisted, narrow and slick. The man's voice came low and fierce. "Left, keep left." They turned sharply into a lower corridor, the walls slick with seawater. The air grew colder. The hum beneath the stone grew louder, the pulse of the vault reawakening, as if sensing the chaos above. Behind them, flashlights bobbed like hunting lanterns. The intruders moved with mechanical precision, communicating in clipped phrases through radios. Clara stumbled on a broken step, nearly falling. The man caught her by the arm, pulling her upright. "You can't stop now." They burst into a side chamber, circular, low-ceilinged, filled with rusted machinery and old generator units, half buried in stone. He dropped his pack, tearing open a bundle of wires and connectors. "Help me," he said. "We need to overload the core." Clara's mind swam. "I don't know how. Hold this steady," he said, thrusting a frayed cable into her hands. "When I say now, connect it to the red terminal." She knelt beside him, hands trembling. The metal burned cold against her palms. He worked fast, cutting through insulation, twisting wires together. Sparks flickered, small and wild. The smell of ozone filled the air. From the corridor behind them came another sound, boots splashing through water, voices shouting. "They're close," she whispered. He didn't look up. "Good, let them come. If this works, no one leaves." Her eyes widened. "You'll die too." He gave a faint smile, weary and certain. "I already did, the day I signed that oath." A burst of light flashed down the tunnel muzzle flare. A bullet ricocheted off the wall, sparking inches from her head. She screamed and ducked. The man shouted now. She slammed the cable into the red terminal. A blinding flash lit the chamber. The old generator roared to life with a deafening hum, lights flickering wildly across the stone. The walls vibrated, the floor trembled. Electric arcs danced across the ceiling like veins of lightning. The man grabbed Clara's shoulder, pulling her down behind a fallen beam as energy surged through the lines. The intruders burst into the room, shouting, but the moment they crossed the threshold, the overload reached its peak. The explosion wasn't a sound, it was a concussion, a pulse of light and heat that tore through the tunnels like the roar of an angry sea. The world turned white, then black. When Clara opened her eyes, everything was dust and silence. Her ears rang, her vision blurred. The chamber was half-dull, apsed jagged stone blocking the entrance, the air thick with smoke. She coughed, dragging herself upright. The generator was gone, reduced to a twisted carcass of metal. The man lay a few feet away, pinned beneath debris. She crawled to him, hands shaking. Hey, stay with me." He turned his head, his breath shallow. Blood trickled down his temple, but there was peace in his eyes. "You did it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No, you did." The ceiling groaned above them, stone shifted, more dust rained down. He grabbed her wrist weakly, pressing something into her hand, a small, metallic device, no larger than a lighter. "The ledger's gone now," he rasped. "But this has copies, digital ones, the truth, the names." Her heart pounded. "What do I do with it?" His voice faded. "Whatever they fear most." The tunnel shook violently, a final collapse rumbling through the rock. Clara clutched the device to her chest, tears streaking her dust-covered face. She tried to pull him free, but the debris was too heavy. He shook his head. "Go. The west exit, take it, before it seals." She didn't move. He looked up at her, voice softer now. "You're not the keeper anymore, Clara. You're the witness." Then the ceiling gave way. A rush of wind and dust engulfed her, flinging her backward into the corridor. She hit the ground hard, gasping, the roar of the collapse deafening in her ears. When it stopped, everything behind her was gone, sealed beneath tons of stone. The villa groaned above, its foundations splitting, cracks spidered up the walls, dust falling like snow. The tunnels were dying. Clara staggered to her feet, the small device clenched in her hand. She turned toward the faint light ahead, the exit he'd told her about. Each step was agony. Each breath tasted of smoke and metal. When she finally stumbled out into the open air, the night hit her like a wave, cold, sharp, alive. The rain had stopped. The cliffs glistened under the weak moonlight. Behind her, the villa stood broken and burning, its silhouette framed against the horizon. She collapsed to her knees, staring at the tiny device in her palm. The screen glowed faintly, a single phrase flashing over and over. Archive recovered too. 4TB secured. Her tears mixed with the rain as she whispered, "It's not over." From somewhere far below, beneath the cliffs, beneath the waves, came a low, distant rumble. The sound of the vault collapsing, sealing itself for good. The sea hissed against the rocks like a warning and a benediction both. Clara rose slowly, pocketing the device. The storm clouds began to break, streaks of pale dawn bleeding into the dark. She turned away from the villa, limping toward the distant road. The weight of gold, of secrets, of silence, all of it was gone now. But in its place, something heavier remained. Truth, the kind that could end empires. As the first light of morning broke over the cliffs, Clara Mayers disappeared into the mist, carrying the last breath of a dying empire, and the proof that silence had finally failed. The world was quiet now. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, it judges. The sea no longer raged against the cliffs. The storm had spent itself, leaving behind a pale, bruised horizon. The air hung thick with the scent of wet earth and salt, the remnants of thunder still whispering through the clouds. Clara stood at the edge of the ruins. The villa behind her was unrecognizable, a skeleton of stone and smoke. What had once been grandeur was now nothing but blackened beams and collapsed marble. The house that had tried so hard to keep its secrets had finally fallen silent. She should have felt relief, freedom. Instead, all she felt was the weight of the small metallic device, clutched in her trembling hand, the one the dying man had given her before the collapse. It blinked faintly, steady and alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. Archive recovered too, 4TB secured, 2.5 terabytes of corruption, blood and silence. Every name, every ledger, every cover-up project Scepter had ever touched. Her fingers tightened around it. The truth was no longer buried beneath the villa, it was breathing in her palm. The sea wind tore through her hair as she turned toward the cliffs. From below, the faint glow of the hidden vault flickered once, then died for good. The hum that had haunted her since her first night here was gone. The house at last was empty, and yet, deep in the earth beneath her feet, she could feel it, not death, memory, the land itself remembering what had been hidden inside it. She looked down at the path leading toward the old access road. The black jeep was gone, tire marks cut deep into the mud, swallowed gradually by the rain. Whoever had hunted her was either dead in the tunnels or retreating to warn the world she now threatened to expose. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her mind was split between exhaustion and instinct, fear and purpose. She could destroy the device now. One hard throw into the ocean, and the story would end quietly, safely, just as they wanted. But she couldn't, because beneath the terror, beneath the exhaustion, there was something new: clarity. The villa hadn't chosen her for her strength or her innocence. It had chosen her because she had nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous kind of truth tellers. Clara limped along the path until she reached the small stone arch that overlooked the cliffs. The morning sun was faint, filtered through fog. The wind had softened, carrying the sound of gulls in lazy circles above the sea. For a brief second, the world looked almost peaceful again. Then her phone, which she hadn't touched in hours, vibrated weakly in her coat pocket. The cracked screen flickered to life, its battery nearly dead. Unknown number, she answered it. Mrs. Mayers. The voice was calm, smooth, familiar in the worst way. It was the woman in the black coat. Clara said nothing. "I warned you." The woman continued softly. "The seal existed for a reason. You've opened something that cannot be contained." Clara's voice trembled with controlled fury. "You buried the truth beneath corpses and gold. Don't tell me about containment. You think this is about money." The woman's tone sharpened, still quiet but cutting. Project Scepter wasn't about wealth. It was about power, the kind that rewrites history before it's even written. "And now it's over," Clara said. A brief silence on the other end, then a small humorless laugh. "No, Mrs. Mayers, now it's public." Clara froze. "What?" the woman continued, her voice steady. "That device you hold, it's not offline, it's connected. The archive's transfer began the moment you left the tunnels. You didn't recover it, you released it." Clara's pulse spiked. She looked down at the blinking light, faster now, brighter. The words across its small display changed. "Uploading. 47%." Her breath caught. "No. By dawn, every network mirror in the world will have the files." The woman said quietly, "Project Scepter will become legend, and legends can't be controlled." Clara's knees went weak. She leaned against the stone arch, wind biting her face. "You wanted this." The woman's sigh was almost sorrowful. "We wanted a world too blind to look. But you, Mrs. Mayers, you forced it to open its eyes." The line went dead. Clara stood there, the sound of waves crashing far below, the blinking light casting faint reflections across her hand. 73%, 84%. The upload was irreversible now. She sank to her knees, watching as gulls circled the ruins of the villa. And then she understood. The truth hadn't destroyed the house, it had freed it. The walls had groaned, the tunnels had screamed, not because they were dying, but because they were releasing. All that corruption, all that silence, all that gold, all of it had been chained to memory. And memory, like the sea, cannot be buried forever. A faint sound caught her attention, movement from behind the ruins. She turned, gripping the device tighter. A figure was approaching, limping, wrapped in a torn coat, and covered in soot. The man, the one from the tunnels, he was alive. Clara ran toward him, stumbling over the debris. He collapsed into her arms, weak but conscious. His voice was barely a whisper. "Did it work?" She nodded, tears mixing with salt water. "It's out there, all of it." He smiled faintly, his face gray with exhaustion. "Then maybe, this time, the sea can rest." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded note, waterlogged but legible. He pressed it into her hand. "It's from Eveline," he whispered, "the last entry, before she sealed the vault." Clara unfolded it carefully, her fingers trembling. The ink was faded, but the words still burned clear. "To whoever inherits this burden, understand that fortune is never what it seems. Gold rusts, silence rots, but truth survives everything." Her vision blurred as she read it again, the words sinking into her chest like a pulse. The man coughed weakly. "You've done what none of us could. You ended it." "No," she whispered, "I only opened it." He looked past her, toward the collapsing villa. "That's how all endings begin." Then his hand fell limp. The wind carried his final breath away. Clara closed his eyes gently. The sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting the villa's ruins in gold. She turned toward the sea again, the device still glowing faintly. Upload complete. The screen went dark. Somewhere, across satellites, servers, and hidden networks, the truth had become unstoppable, unburied, undeniable, eternal. The wind rose around her, soft and endless, carrying the scent of rain and salt and smoke. For the first time since the day she stepped into the dollar house, Clara felt no fear, only quiet resolve. She looked back one last time at the ruins behind her, at the villa that had destroyed and reborn her, and whispered, "Rest now." Then she turned and walked toward the light breaking over the cliffs. As the sun rose, the secrets of Project Scepter began to spread across the world, and beneath the ruins of Villa Marena, the sea kept whispering her name. The light of morning spread slow and heavy across the cliffs, washing the ruins of the villa in gold and grey. The smoke had thinned to mist. The sea below shimmered with deceptive calm, as if nothing had ever happened, as if the earth itself had decided to forget. But Clara couldn't forget. She stood at the water's edge, her reflection fractured by the tide, the small device still clutched in her trembling hand. Its screen was blank, now upload complete, transmission irreversible. The truth was no longer hers. It belonged to the world. Her pulse echoed in her ears like the beating of distant drums. Somewhere across continents, the files were already waking, appearing on screens, flooding encrypted networks, trickling into the hands of those who had waited decades for proof. Every ledger, every transaction, every hidden alliance and assassination, all of it, out in the open. And all traced back here to this forgotten house, to the woman who bought a dream for $1 and found the bones of empires beneath it. She sat on a broken slab of marble, the sea wind tugging at her hair. The silence around her was immense, almost sacred. She didn't know whether she had saved the truth or doomed it. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rumble of helicopters rolled through the clouds, low, searching, uncertain. The world was beginning to stir. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her shoulders. For every secret she had exposed, there were names, powerful names, dangerous names, and behind them, faces. Families, armies, people who built their kingdoms on lies, people who would never forgive her for undoing them. She thought of her son then, the small apartment she had left behind, the way he'd smiled when she told him the house might be their new beginning. She whispered into the sea, "You'll have to forgive me, Daniel." Her voice cracked, but there was a strange peace in the sound, because for the first time in her life she wasn't running. Behind her, the remains of the villa groaned under their own weight, a slow collapse as the last of its beams gave way. The roof caved inward with a dull thunder. The villa was finally burying itself, not to hide its shame, but to seal its story. Clara stood, wiping the dust and salt from her face. The faint breeze carried the scent of something new, rain, earth, and possibility. Then she heard it, the faint crackle of her phone. She pulled it from her coat, expecting static, but instead a notification blinked across the shattered screen. Breaking, global day, to leak, unknown source exposes government ledgers worldwide. Her breath caught. The words blurred as she scrolled. Every major outlet, every continent, every secret laid bare. Names she recognized from the ledger, names she didn't. Names that had seemed untouchable. The world was burning with truth. She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh, part relief, part terror. Then a voice, deep, steady, close, startled her. "I told you legends can't be contained." She turned sharply. The woman from the black jeep stood a few feet away on the rocks, coat whipping in the wind. No soldiers this time, no guns, just her. Clara's voice trembled. "You said if I released it, they'd come for me." "They will," the woman said, stepping closer. "But they'll come for all of us now. That's the balance." Her tone wasn't threatening, it was almost admiring. Clara studied her. "Then why are you here?" "To see if you'd do it," the woman said. "To see if you'd finish what Eveline couldn't." The name hung in the air like a bell tolling in fog. Eveline wasn't trying to hide gold, Clara said quietly. She was trying to hide guilt. The woman's gaze dropped to the waves. We all were. They stood in silence for a long moment. The sea roared below. The villa groaned behind them. And the world they had both helped awaken, was changing beyond their sight. Finally, the woman reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope soaked, crumpled, sealed with wax. She held it out. "She left this," the woman said softly. "The last letter Eveline wrote. I couldn't destroy it." Clara hesitated, then took it. The paper was brittle beneath her fingers. She broke the seal and unfolded it carefully. Inside, in that same familiar, elegant handwriting, were just a few lines. "The world will always build its walls. You were never meant to tear them down, only to show they could be broken. When truth breathes again, do not mourn what it burns. Some fires cleanse the earth." Clara's eyes filled with tears. The ink bled where the rain touched it, as though the sea itself wanted to reclaim the words. When she looked up, the woman was gone, vanished into the mist. Only the faint trail of her footsteps remained, leading toward the road. Clara folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket beside the device. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. A wave crashed against the rocks, higher than before, soaking her shoes. She turned back toward the sea, the sky widening above her, streaks of sunlight piercing through the clouds like blades. The ledger, the gold, the ghosts all gone. What remained was something greater, a choice. She could vanish, disappear into anonymity, let history rewrite itself without her. Or she could step into the light and face what she'd unleashed, become the voice for the truth she'd freed. She closed her eyes, listening to the sea, the sound of its endless rhythm, and she understood. Eveline hadn't cursed her. She had prepared her. Every whisper, every vision, every haunting, they weren't warnings. They were lessons. The house hadn't trapped her. It had taught her. She took one final look at the ruins. The sun caught on the broken glass of the upper windows, scattering tiny flashes of light like fragments of stars. For a moment the villa almost looked alive again, whole. Then a wave struck the cliffs, and the last standing column fell, crumbling into the surf below. The house was gone. The secret was gone. Only truth remained. Clara turned toward the dirt road leading away from the coast. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one lighter than the last. The wind tugged at her coat, the horizon stretched open, and the rising sun painted her shadow long across the path. Behind her the sea swallowed the last of the villa, waves hissing against the stone as if whispering good-bye. She didn't look back. As the morning light spilled over the cliffs, Clara Mayers walked away from the ruins and into history, carrying with her not gold, but the weightless, eternal fire of truth. It began with a single upload, a blinking icon on a forgotten satellite server that no one was supposed to notice. By dawn, it had spread across continents like wildfire. Screens flickered to life in newsrooms, military bases, and government offices. Encrypted files decrypted themselves with silent precision. Hidden ledgers unfolded across terminals and devices belonging to men and women who had believed they were untouchable. The world awoke to chaos. Across the Atlantic, a newsroom anchor broke from the teleprompter, voice trembling as she read. A leak of unprecedented scale has revealed financial and military documents dating back nearly 80 years, implicating global officials and corporations in the covert operation once code, named Project Scepter. In Tokyo, trading floors fell into silence. In London, sirens wailed outside a parliament building as convoys vanished into fog. In New York, the stock exchange froze mid-bell. By sunrise, more than half the world's networks were rerouting traffic to mirror the data. The truth was no longer a secret, it was a contagion. And somewhere far from the noise of the modern world, Clara Mayers sat alone in a dim cafe at the edge of a coastal town, her face half hidden beneath a hood, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. The small television behind the counter crackled with static before settling on a live broadcast. The words scrolling across the bottom of the screen felt unreal. Global revelation, the Scepter Files. The voice of the reporter was calm, trying and failing to contain the tremor beneath her tone. The documents trace billions in lost assets, wartime smuggling, political assassinations, and a shadow operation known only as the Custodians. Experts are calling it the greatest exposure of organized corruption in human history. The cafe was silent except for the flicker of the TV and the whisper of the sea outside. A man at the counter muttered, "They're saying the files were released anonymously. No one knows who did it." Clara looked down at the small metallic device resting beside her cup. Its light was gone now, no more blinking, no more hum, just silence. She whispered to herself, "They don't need to know." The waitress, young and curious, glanced at the screen and shook her head. "Can you imagine? 80 years of secrets. Someone must have been brave or stupid." Clara smiled faintly. Sometimes they're the same thing. The woman laughed softly and moved on, oblivious to the weight behind those words. Clara leaned back, letting the sounds of the cafe fade into the distance. Her reflection in the window was ghost-like, superimposed over the churning sea. For the first time, she saw peace there, not victory, but peace. Her phone buzzed again, the signal weak but alive. A new message appeared, no sender, no number. "It's done." She stared at it for a moment, then typed back with shaking fingers. "Then let them see what silence costs." A faint smile touched her lips as she hit send. Outside, people were gathering along the streets, faces lit by the glow of their screens. News vans raced through the fog. Reporters shouted updates. The world was waking up, hungry for the truth it had been denied for generations. The first ripple had become a wave. She stood, leaving a few bills on the counter, and stepped into the daylight. The sea wind met her face like an old friend. Down the road, a large digital billboard flickered to life, one of thousands around the world hijacked by the file's automatic code. Its black screen filled with white text. Project Scepter, for every fortune, a body, for every secret, a name. The words glowed above the waking town like scripture. Clara watched as people stopped mid-step, staring up at it, confused, shocked, transfixed. A woman dropped her groceries. A man crossed himself. She turned toward the cliffs, where the horizon glowed with the rising sun. Every empire she had uncovered was cracking now. The weight of history was finally collapsing under its own lies. But for all the chaos it unleashed, what she felt wasn't guilt, it was release. The truth had survived. And so had she. She walked along the coastal path until the last houses disappeared behind her, replaced by wild grass and wind. The road curved upward toward a small broadcasting tower, rusted, half, forgotten, long decommissioned. Its door hung open, creaking in the breeze. She stepped inside. The equipment still worked barely. The hum of static filled the room like a pulse. She sat before the dusty console, staring at the blinking cursor on the terminal screen. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a quiet voice, she spoke not to the machine, but to the world that had refused to listen until now. This began with a lie. A house built on gold and blood, traded for silence. But the silence is broken now. If you hear this, know that the truth has a cost, and it's already been paid. She leaned forward, pressing the key that opened the live frequency. The words she spoke next carried across 1,000 airwaves, whispered through static, bouncing off satellites, finding ears that didn't know they were listening. History isn't written by the powerful anymore. It's written by those who survive them. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Remember this, the sea never forgets, and neither should we." The transmission cut. Static filled the air again. Clara sat in the quiet, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs, not with rage, but with rhythm, like applause. As the world above her reeled in chaos, Clara Mayers sat beneath the rusted tower, finally at peace, knowing that the truth, once spoken, could never be drowned again. By noon, the world was no longer the same. The broadcast had become a storm unstoppable, uncontainable. News networks tripped over themselves trying to verify the impossible. Government lines crashed. Old alliances fractured in hours. It wasn't just a leak. It was exposure on a scale humanity had never seen. The Scepter files had named names: generals, ministers, CEO, monarchs, the ghosts of war and the architects of peace alike. Money that had vanished after World War II suddenly had coordinates. Gold that no bank accounted for had receipts, and for every ledger entry there was blood. The world was seeing its reflection for the first time, and it was ugly. Crowds gathered in city squares, holding up their phones, showing each other the truth. Some shouted, some wept. Others simply stood still, staring at the realization that the stories they'd built their lives around were all connected to one house on a forgotten cliff, the house no one wanted. The villa of silence and the woman who had broken it. Clara watched the chaos unfold from a small radio shop on the outskirts of town. The old televisions in the window played simultaneous broadcasts from around the globe. Each screen showed a different city: Rome, New York, Berlin, Geneva, all united by the same story, her story. She stood half hidden in the doorway, the weight of it all pressing down but no longer crushing her. A news anchor's voice carried through the static. The files, believed to have originated from the long, abandoned Mariner estate, are now confirmed authentic. Officials linked to the covert operation known as Project Scepter are resigning worldwide. Arrests have begun across multiple countries. The image cut to an aerial view of the villa, or what remained of it. The helicopter camera circled the cliffs, showing the blackened ruins, the collapsed vault entrance, the sea foam still boiling from where the tunnels had caved. Clara felt her throat tighten. She could almost hear it again, the hum beneath the stone, the voices of the past. But now it wasn't fear she felt. It was finality. The reporter's tone softened. Authorities have confirmed the house belonged to the late Eveline Mariner, whose records indicate a vast network of hidden accounts dating back to 1943. Her estate has now been declared a protected site, a monument to truth uncovered. Protected? The irony made Clara smile. She turned away from the screens and stepped outside, the wind catching her coat as she walked down the narrow street. Every passerby had their eyes on their phones. Snippets of the broadcast drifted through the air like fragments of a global confession. Classified files detailing the misuse of wartime gold reserves. Untraceable offshore ledgers confirmed through optical data recovery, all tied to a single coastal property sold for $1. Her name wasn't on any of it. The files had released themselves anonymously, just as the dying man had promised. She had done her part. The truth had its own wings now, but peace didn't come easily. Every window she passed reflected faces, people confused, grieving, angry. The truth hadn't liberated them. It had undone their certainties. She paused at a small square where a crowd had gathered around a television. The footage showed military trucks surrounding an airbase. The anchor spoke with practiced gravity. Officials confirmed several key figures named in the Scepter files have fled custody. Unrest is spreading across financial districts. Leaders urge calm, but the markets. Clara turned away. She didn't need to hear the rest. She found a bench overlooking the sea, sat down, and let the wind wash over her. The horizon was endless, the waves rhythmic. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the world she'd upended was trying to decide what to do with its reflection. She whispered, almost to herself, "You asked for truth, Eveline. Now let's see what they do with it." The breeze answered only with silence. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Eveline's last letter, the one sealed with the serpent's crest. The paper had dried stiff from the salt air, but the ink still shimmered faintly. She unfolded it again, reading the final line one more time. "When truth breathes again, do not mourn what it burns." The words felt heavier now, more real. She traced them with her fingertip before folding the letter neatly and tucking it back inside her pocket. For a long time, she just sat there, a woman who had burned down an empire and had nothing left to her name except peace and conscience. And then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed movement down by the shoreline. Two men in dark coats were standing near the rocks, talking quietly. One held a camera, the other a press badge. They were journalists, part of the wave drawn to the villa's legend. She watched them for a moment, unseen. One of them pointed up toward the cliffs. The other raised his lens. The world was already rewriting her story, framing it for headlines, documentaries, think pieces. They'd debate whether she was a hero or a criminal, a whistleblower or a thief. It didn't matter. Truth was never clean. She stood, letting the wind lift her hair, and turned away from the sea. Her footsteps carried her down a dirt path toward the main road, the sun hanging low in the sky behind her. She walked past the cafe, past the markets, past the noise of the world rediscovering its conscience. And then, just as she reached the bend in the road, her phone buzzed again. A single notification, unknown sender, "The villa remembers you." Clara froze, her breath caught. The words glowed faintly before the message vanished on its own. She looked up toward the cliffs. The sun dipped behind them, throwing long shadows over the ruins. For a brief second, maybe imagination, maybe not, she thought she saw a flicker of light deep within the remains of the vault. A single pulse, like a heartbeat, then it was gone. Clara smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Rest," she whispered. "It's over." She turned back to the road and kept walking, her figure growing smaller against the horizon. Above her, the clouds parted and light broke through, clean, soft, golden. The villa, the vault, the ghosts all behind her now. But somewhere beneath the sea, the current shifted, carrying whispers only the deep could hear. The truth was free. The keepers were gone, but history was just beginning to rewrite itself. As the last light of the sun fell across the cliffs, Clara Mayers disappeared down the coastal road, not a fugitive, not a hero, but a witness whose name history would never forget. The truth she unleashed would echo through generations, carried forever by the sea that kept its debts. Morning arrived soft and golden, the kind of light that makes even ruins look merciful. The storm had passed days ago, but the coastline still carried its scars, broken trees, scattered stones, the faint scent of burnt salt lingering in the air. The villa stood no more. Only fragments of wall and marble jutted from the cliffs, halves wallowed by the sea. Authorities had come and gone. Reporters too. For a week, the ruins had been surrounded by cameras and questions. Then the world moved on, as it always does, chasing newer chaos, fresher headlines. And so the villa was left alone at last to crumble in peace. Clara stood at the edge of what had once been the courtyard, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The sea wind tugged at her coat as she stared down at the water below, where the waves washed over what remained of the tunnels. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the day the files went public. Not to the journalists who tried to find her, not to the government officials who offered her safety, not even to the quiet man from the coastal police who had called her a hero. She wasn't sure what that word meant anymore. The world now knew what she had uncovered. People had marched in cities, demanding justice. Trials had begun, fortunes had collapsed overnight, but none of it brought her peace. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces, the ones who had died in those tunnels, the ones who had tried to stop her, the ones who had believed they were protecting something sacred. And above them all, she saw Eveline Mariner, not the woman from the portraits, but the one from her dreams, standing in the flickering light of the vault, whispering, "Every truth takes something from you." Clara took a deep breath, the salt air burning her lungs. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small metal device. It was cracked now, corroded by sea air, its light long extinguished. She knelt beside the edge of the cliff and placed it gently on the ground. "This is where you belong," she murmured. The sea answered with a soft hiss, retreating and returning in its endless rhythm. She stayed there for a while, the sound of the waves matching the beating of her heart. Finally, she stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. Behind her, workers in orange vests were marking the perimeter with stakes and signs. The government had declared the property condemned unsafe, unstable, uninhabitable. A clean word for something that had bled. One of the workers called out, "Ma'am, we'll be detonating the foundation at noon. You might want to clear the area." Clara nodded faintly. "I won't be long." She turned back toward the cliffs. There was one last thing she had to do. From her bag, she pulled a small wooden box hand, carved, simple, worn smooth by time. Inside were ashes, not of the house, not of gold or paper, but of the man who had died in the tunnels. She hadn't known his full name, only that he had once been a part of the system he'd helped her destroy. His badge had read, Harlan Reed. She had promised him she'd finish what he couldn't. Now she could. She opened the box and let the ashes scatter into the wind. The sea caught them, carrying them outward in a fine silver mist that glowed in the sunlight before dissolving into the horizon. "Thank you," she whispered. The wind tugged at her coat again, stronger this time, as if answering back. She smiled through the ache in her chest. Somewhere behind her, a drone hummed faintly, a news crew, capturing the final demolition from above. She ignored it. This moment wasn't theirs to record. This was between her, the sea, and the house that had taught her the price of truth. She looked one last time at the ruins, the fractured walls, the crumbled pillars, the vines reclaiming the marble. It no longer looked cursed. It looked free. In the light, she saw something glinting among the rubble, a shard of mirror from the grand hallway, half buried in sand. She knelt, brushing it clean. Her reflection stared back, older, quieter, eyes lined not with fear but with knowing. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw another face reflected beside hers, Eveline's, faint, smiling. Clara exhaled, setting the shard gently back into the earth. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. As she reached the road, she heard the dull thud of the first demolition charge echo across the cliffs. The ground trembled, and the last fragments of the villa began to fall, collapsing into the sea that had guarded its secrets for generations. Dust rose like smoke from a dying fire. The waves swallowed it whole, and then silence. The house that had once held empires of gold, blood, and guilt was gone. All that remained was sunlight and sea spray. Clara didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to. The truth was no longer buried, and neither was she. She reached her car parked along the narrow dirt road. The air was warmer now, the clouds breaking into soft ribbons of light. As she opened the door, she caught sight of a small envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Her name written in neat cursive. Her stomach tightened. She unfolded it slowly. The paper smelled faintly of salt and lavender. Inside were 3 words written in Eveline's elegant hand: "The sea forgives." Clara closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, not gone, but gentler. She slid into the car, turned the key, and looked once more toward the ocean. The light shimmered across the water, endless and alive. Some debts, she realized, aren't meant to be repaid, only understood. As the final dust settled over the cliffs, Clara drove away, the sun following her path, and behind her, where ruin once stood, the sea shone brighter than ever, as if at last it too had found peace. The road wound along the cliffs in slow, deliberate curves, tracing the edge of a world Clara no longer recognized, one that was quieter, cleaner, and somehow more real. The villa had vanished behind her, but its echo traveled with the wind, not as a curse anymore, but as a memory that had finally been set free. The horizon shimmered with early sunlight. Waves glittered like molten glass. Birds wheeled overhead, white and effortless, as if the world had forgotten how heavy it once was. Clara drove in silence, the rhythmic hum of the car blending with the murmur of the ocean below. The envelope from the windshield lay open on the passenger seat, its words still echoing through her chest, "The sea forgives." It was the first time in years that sentence didn't sound impossible. Miles passed before she stopped at a small overlook the kind travelers used to pause at just to breathe in the view. The guardrail was rusted, the paint worn thin by salt and storms. Beyond it, the ocean stretched endlessly, vast and untamed, its voice softer now, less like warning, more like lullaby. Clara stepped out and stood there, letting the sun touch her face. For the first time since everything began, she didn't feel like she was running toward or away from anything. She was simply there. The world had already moved on to new noise, the aftermath of the Scepter files, now a headline fading by the hour. Governments scrambled, economies reeled, and names once too powerful to question now hung in disgrace. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just a woman who had once bought a house for $1 and found out what it cost to own the truth. A breeze swept up from the sea, catching the loose strands of her hair. She could almost hear Harlan's voice carried in it, the quiet steadiness that had guided her through those final hours underground. "You're not the keeper anymore, Clara. You're the witness." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Then I'll remember for both of us." The sound of an approaching engine pulled her back to the present. A small white van came down the road and stopped beside her car. The door slid open, revealing a young woman with a press badge clipped to her jacket. She smiled nervously. "Excuse me, are you Clara Mayers?" Clara hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "That depends who's asking." "I'm a journalist with World Light. I've been following the aftermath of the Scepter leak." The young woman's voice trembled with awe. "I don't want to intrude, but people are calling you the voice of the villa. Is it true you started all of it?" Clara looked back toward the horizon. The sea sparkled with innocence, as if laughing at the question. She answered softly, "The truth started itself. I just stopped hiding it." The journalist stepped closer. "Do you regret it?" The question lingered in the salt air. Clara thought about everything she had lost: her peace, her home, her anonymity. And then she thought about everything the world had gained: awareness, accountability, memory. Her voice was steady when she said, "No, the only thing worth keeping secret is kindness. Everything else deserves the light." The journalist nodded slowly, eyes shining. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a recorder. "Could I?" Clara raised a hand gently. "No recordings, not of me, not anymore. The story isn't mine to tell now, it's yours. Just tell it gently." The young woman lowered the recorder, visibly moved. "I will." Clara smiled faintly. "Good. And when you write it, don't make it about gold or power. Make it about what's left when both are gone." The journalist swallowed hard, nodding. "What is left?" Clara turned her gaze back to the horizon. Truth and the people brave enough to carry it. A long silence followed, broken only by the whisper of waves. The journalist stepped back, giving her a final nod before returning to the van. As the engine faded into distance, Clara remained where she was watching sunlight dance on the water. The ocean glittered as if answering her, the light reflecting in endless fragments like a promise. She pulled the small key from her pocket, the red one she had found behind Eveline's portrait. It gleamed faintly in her palm, warm from her touch. She smiled at it, a quiet farewell, and threw it into the sea. It arced through the air, a flash of red against blue before vanishing beneath the surface. The ripples spread outward, circles upon circles, until they disappeared into the infinite. "Now it's over," she whispered. The wind carried her words away. She got back into her car, took one last look at the endless water, and drove inland away from the cliffs, away from the ghosts, toward whatever came next. As the road curved between fields of golden grass, her radio crackled to life, faint static, then a voice. "This is Channel 9 News, continuing coverage of the Scepter revelations. Protesters have gathered in major cities worldwide demanding accountability. Meanwhile, new foundations are being established to preserve evidence from the Mariner estate, now referred to as the house that spoke." Clara smiled softly, eyes still on the road. The house finally learned to speak. She murmured. Her car disappeared into the sunlit distance, the world stretching wide and open ahead of her. Behind her, the cliffs stood silent, waves brushing the shore in gentle rhythm. The sea glittered under the morning light, 1,000 reflections shimmering like the ghosts of truth finally free. For the first time in a long time, the coast held no secrets, only peace. As the sun climbed higher over the horizon, Clara Mayers drove toward a future unburdened by silence, carrying with her nothing but memory, and the faint, forgiving breath of the sea that had once kept the world's greatest secret. A year had passed since the storm. The world had changed, but so had Clara. The name Project Scepter had become a synonym for truth in every corner of the world, whispered in universities, debated in courtrooms, memorialized in documentaries. Governments had fallen, new ones had risen, fortunes had shifted hands like sand through fingers, but here, on the quiet edge of the coast, none of that mattered. The sea had reclaimed the ruins of Villa Marina, softening its edges with tide and time. Where walls once stood, wildflowers now grew bright yellows and whites, nodding gently in the breeze. The cliffs that once hid tunnels of greed now sheltered nothing but wind and salt and sky. And at the top of that hill, where the driveway curved through overgrown grass, a new sign gleamed in morning light. The Villa Foundation Community Shelter and Restoration Center. Children's laughter drifted across the open air. Inside, the smell of fresh paint and warm bread filled the halls. The rooms were bright and open sunlight spilling through clean windows that overlooked the sea. There were no chandeliers, no portraits, no ghosts. Only color, warmth, and life. Clara stood in the entryway, a clipboard in hand, watching as volunteers unpacked boxes of food and bedding. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver. There were lines around her eyes not of age, but of peace. A little boy ran past her barefoot, holding a seashell. "Careful, Liam," she called softly. He stopped, grinning wide, his dark curls damp from the spray of the tide. "Mom, look what I found." He held up the shell, smooth, white, shaped like a small spiral. Clara knelt to his level, brushing sand from his cheeks. "That one's special," she said. "You know why. Because it's old," she smiled. "Because it remembers." Liam tilted his head, puzzled in the way only children can be. "Remembers what?" She touched the shell gently. "Everything the sea wants to keep." He studied it for a moment, then nodded solemnly as if he understood in some small way, and ran back toward the others. Clara rose slowly, her gaze following him to the garden, where volunteers were planting rows of herbs along the path. Beyond them, the sea glittered endlessly. The world felt whole again. She turned as footsteps approached behind her. A woman in her 20s, a journalist's badge clipped to her jacket, smiled warmly. "Mrs. Mayers, it's beautiful here. The transformation is incredible." Clara chuckled softly. "It's not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who walks through that door." The woman gestured to the sign above the entryway. "Still, you named it the Villa Foundation. After everything this place stood for, that's a brave choice." Clara looked up at the sign, the sunlight catching its bronze lettering. "The name doesn't curse the house. People did. It's time to give it a new story." They walked together through the halls, the soft sound of children's voices, volunteers laughing in the kitchen, music playing faintly from a radio. The woman scribbled notes on her pad. "Some say you've rebuilt the villa to make peace with your past," she said carefully. "Others say you're trying to remind the world what truth costs." Clara smiled, her eyes kind but distant. "Maybe both. The truth took everything from me, but it also gave me something I didn't know I needed: purpose." They stepped out onto the veranda overlooking the cliffs. The sea below sparkled beneath a pale sun, waves rolling in lazy rhythm. The journalist closed her notebook. "Do you ever think about the house, what it used to be?" Clara leaned on the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Every day," she said softly, but not with fear anymore. The house wasn't evil, it was just full of everything people tried to hide. Now it's empty, and that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The journalist hesitated. "Do you believe in redemption, Mrs. Mayers?" Clara turned to her, eyes glinting with quiet conviction. "I believe in rebuilding. Redemption is just the word people use when they start again." The journalist smiled, closing her notebook. "Thank you, that's going to stay with me." As she left, Clara remained by the railing, the wind playing through her hair. The ocean seemed to hum softly below, that same eternal sound she had once feared, now comforting, constant. The air carried laughter from the garden. Volunteers had begun setting up tables for lunch. Children ran barefoot across the grass, chasing each other in circles. And for a fleeting moment, she imagined Eveline Mariner standing at the edge of the garden, young, radiant, free of the guilt that had once bound her. Clara smiled faintly. "We did it, Eveline," she whispered. "We gave it back." The sunlight brightened, washing the hill in gold. The sea shimmered, endless and alive. In that moment, Clara realized something profound: the villa had never been cursed. It had only been waiting for love strong enough to outlast its secrets. She turned, walking toward the open door of the shelter, as a new group of visitors arrived, mothers with children, men carrying boxes, strangers drawn by word of something good. They didn't come for history. They came for hope. Clara opened the door wide and greeted them with a smile. "Welcome," she said softly. "You're safe here." And as they entered, sunlight followed, pouring through the once dark halls like a benediction. As the sea glittered beyond the cliffs, laughter replaced silence, and the house once sold for $1 became priceless, not for its gold, but for the kindness it now held. Evening descended slowly over the coastline, wrapping the new villa foundation in soft amber light. The air was filled with music, faint, distant, the sound of a small violin being played by one of the children near the garden. Its notes floated upward, weaving through the scent of rosemary and salt, carrying warmth where once there had been only whispers of fear. Clara stood on the veranda, her hands resting on the smooth wood of the railing. She could hear laughter from inside, volunteers setting tables for dinner, children chasing each other down the halls that were once corridors of silence. The sound was pure, unbroken, alive. The old stone path leading down to the sea had been repaired now, lined with lanterns that flickered in the twilight. She watched as Liam ran toward the cliffs with two other children, their voices echoing against the water. Her heart swelled and ached at once. Once she had come here searching for a home. Now she had built one not just for herself, but for every soul that needed to begin again. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of waves crashing far below. The ocean had always spoken to her, first in anger, then in warning, and now, finally, in peace. She closed her eyes, letting its rhythm steady her breath. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. "Beautiful night," said a familiar voice. She turned. It was the journalist from months before, older now, but still carrying that same sense of wonder in her eyes. A leather satchel hung at her side, and in her hands was a freshly printed book. Clara smiled faintly. "You found me again." The woman laughed. "You're not easy to find when you don't want to be. But I had to bring you this." She handed her the book. The cover was simple cream, colored, embossed with bronze lettering. "The House That Spoke the Truth Beneath Villa Marina," by Elena Ward. Clara traced her fingers over the title, silent for a long moment. "You finished it." Elena nodded. "It's already spreading faster than I expected. People are calling it the book that closes the story." Clara's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Stories like this never really close, Elena. They just find new homes." The journalist hesitated. "Maybe, but people needed an ending, something to believe in after all the chaos. They needed you." Clara smiled gently. "They don't need me. They just need to remember that truth can be reborn." They stood together in silence, watching as the last light faded behind the waves. Elena turned to her. "What will you do now?" Clara looked toward the shelter, children laughing, lamps glowing through the windows like fireflies. "Keep this place alive," she said softly. "Every child here comes from a story that ended too soon. I want to give them a beginning." Elena smiled. "You really turned a curse into grace." Clara's voice was calm. "No, the curse was never the house. It was forgetting what it meant to care." The two women stood there as the sky deepened into indigo. A few stars began to appear, scattered and soft. From the distance, Liam's voice carried through the wind, "Mom, come see this." Clara's face lit with surprise and affection. "Duty calls," she said with a small laugh. Elena smiled. "Go, I'll be in touch." Clara nodded and walked down the path toward the cliffs, her steps light, the evening air cool against her face. Liam and the other children were crouched by the water's edge, their hands digging through wet sand. "Look," he said proudly, "we found it." In his small palms lay a piece of something that shimmered faintly under the last streaks of light, smooth, curved gold, colored. Clara knelt beside him, brushing away the sand. It was a fragment of metal, rounded and worn by years of salt and tide. The engraving was faint but unmistakable, a serpent coiled around a key, the Mariner crest, her breath caught. The house was still giving back its secrets. Liam looked up at her, puzzled. "What is it?" Clara smiled, her voice soft but certain. "A reminder that even the sea remembers." He tilted his head, curious. "Is it bad?" She shook her head. "No, sweetheart. It's just history." He grinned, satisfied with the answer, and tossed it back into the waves. The sea swallowed it whole without a sound. For a moment, the horizon seemed to shimmer brighter, a brief flare of light deep beneath the surface, and then it was gone. Clara exhaled slowly, her heart quiet, her spirit still. The boy ran ahead toward the lanterns, his laughter echoing in the dark. She followed him up the path, the cool sand crunching under her boots. When she reached the garden again, the lamps were glowing golden, their light soft against the new walls of the shelter. Music played faintly from inside a piano, the same tune she once heard ghosting through the ruined villa years ago. But now it was full, alive, touched by human warmth. Clara stood at the threshold for a long moment, watching the people inside, families sharing food, children coloring at the tables, volunteers smiling through exhaustion. This was what the villa was always meant to be, not a fortress of secrets but a haven of light. She stepped inside, greeted by warmth and laughter. Liam tugged at her sleeve, holding up a piece of paper he had been drawing on. "Mom, look, I made the house." She knelt beside him, smiling at the crude sketch, the outline of a big home with windows glowing and birds flying overhead. He pointed proudly. "See, no cracks." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled him close. "No, sweetheart," she whispered, "no cracks." She pressed a kiss to his forehead and looked around the room one last time, the flicker of candlelight on new paint, the hum of soft voices, the sound of life reborn. Outside, the sea kept its steady rhythm. The wind carried the scent of lavender from the garden. The stars blinked awake one by one, their reflection shimmering on the quiet water below. The world, at last, was at peace. And as the night deepened, Clara Mayers stood beneath the same sky that had once watched her lose everything, now watching her rebuild it, all knowing that some stories don't end in silence, but in song. The villa had been bought for $1, but its true worth was never measured in gold. It was measured in the hearts it healed, the truths it freed, and the laughter that finally returned to its halls. The house that once whispered was silent no more. It had learned to breathe again through her, through them, through the world it helped awaken. Evening descended slowly over the coastline, wrapping the new villa foundation in soft amber light. The air was filled with music, faint, distant, the sound of a small violin being played by one of the children near the garden. Its notes floated upward, weaving through the scent of rosemary and salt, carrying warmth where once there had been only whispers of fear. Clara stood on the veranda, her hands resting on the smooth wood of the railing. She could hear laughter from inside, volunteers setting tables for dinner, children chasing each other down the halls that were once corridors of silence. The sound was pure, unbroken, alive. The old stone path, leading down to the sea, had been repaired now, lined with lanterns that flickered in the twilight. She watched as Liam ran toward the cliffs with 2 other children, their voices echoing against the water. Her heart swelled and ached at once. Once she had come here searching for a home. Now she had built one not just for herself, but for every soul that needed to begin again. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of waves crashing far below. The ocean had always spoken to her, first in anger, then in warning, and now finally in peace. She closed her eyes, letting its rhythm steady her breath. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. "Beautiful night," said a familiar voice. She turned. It was the journalist from months before, older now, but still carrying that same sense of wonder in her eyes. A leather satchel hung at her side, and in her hands was a freshly printed book. Clara smiled faintly. "You found me again," the woman laughed. "You're not easy to find when you don't want to be, but I had to bring you this." She handed her the book. The cover was simple cream, colored, embossed with bronze lettering, ***, the house that spoke the truth beneath Villa Marina, ***, by Elena Ward. Clara traced her fingers over the title, silent for a long moment. "You finished it," Elena nodded. "It's already spreading faster than I expected. People are calling it the book that closes the story." Clara's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Stories like this never really close, Elena. They just find new homes." The journalist hesitated. "Maybe, but people needed an ending, something to believe in after all the chaos. They needed you. Clara smiled gently. "They don't need me. They just need to remember that truth can be reborn." They stood together in silence, watching as the last light faded behind the waves. Elena turned to her. "What will you do now?" Clara looked toward the shelter, children laughing, lamps glowing through the windows like fireflies. "Keep this place alive," she said softly. "Every child here comes from a story that ended too soon. I want to give them a beginning." Elena smiled. "You really turned a curse into grace." Clara's voice was calm. "No, the curse was never the house. It was forgetting what it meant to care." The two women stood there as the sky deepened into indigo. A few stars began to appear, scattered and soft. From the distance, Liam's voice carried through the wind, "Mom, come see this." Clara's face lit with surprise and affection. "Duty calls," she said with a small laugh. Elena smiled. "Go, I'll be in touch." Clara nodded and walked down the path toward the cliffs, her steps light, the evening air cool against her face. Liam and the other children were crouched by the water's edge, their hands digging through wet sand. "Look," he said proudly. "We found it." In his small palms lay a piece of something that shimmered faintly under the last streaks of light, smooth, curved gold, colored. Clara knelt beside him, brushing away the sand. It was a fragment of metal, rounded and worn by years of salt and tide. The engraving was faint but unmistakable, a serpent coiled around a key, the mariner crest. Her breath caught. The house was still giving back its secrets. Liam looked up at her, puzzled. "What is it?" Clara smiled, her voice soft but certain, a reminder that even the sea remembers. He tilted his head, curious. "Is it bad?" She shook her head. "No, sweetheart, it's just history." He grinned, satisfied with the answer, and tossed it back into the waves. The sea swallowed it whole without a sound. For a moment, the horizon seemed to shimmer brighter, a brief flare of light deep beneath the surface, and then it was gone. Clara exhaled slowly, her heart quiet, her spirit still. The boy ran ahead toward the lanterns, his laughter echoing in the dark. She followed him up the path, the cool sand crunching under her boots. When she reached the garden again, the lamps were glowing golden, their light soft against the new walls of the shelter. Music played faintly from inside a piano, the same tune she once heard ghosting through the ruined villa years ago. But now it was full, alive, touched by human warmth. Clara stood at the threshold for a long moment, watching the people inside, families sharing food, children coloring at the tables, volunteers smiling through exhaustion. This was what the villa was always meant to be. Not a fortress of secrets, but a haven of light. She stepped inside, greeted by warmth and laughter. Liam tugged at her sleeve, holding up a piece of paper he had been drawing on. "Mom, look, I made the house." She knelt beside him, smiling at the crude sketch, the outline of a big home with windows glowing and birds flying overhead. He pointed proudly. "See, no cracks." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled him close. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "No cracks." She pressed a kiss to his forehead and looked around the room one last time, the flicker of candlelight on new paint, the hum of soft voices, the sound of life reborn. Outside, the sea kept its steady rhythm. The wind carried the scent of lavender from the garden. The stars blinked awake one by one, their reflection shimmering on the quiet water below. The world, at last, was at peace. And as the night deepened, Clara Mayers stood beneath the same sky that had once watched her lose everything, now watching her rebuild it all, knowing that some stories don't end in silence, but in song. The villa had been bought for $1, but its true worth was never measured in gold. It was measured in the hearts it healed, the truths it freed, and the laughter that finally returned to its halls.